At 86, Christopher Lloyd has finally revealed a special list, 5 names from Back to the Future that he admits he could never truly be close to. This is not an accusation, nor is it bitterness, but rather the heartfelt reflection of a man who has spent decades in quiet silence. And perhaps it is this very sense of belated honesty and sincerity that makes his story so haunting, one that holds the listener captive until the very last moment. Crispin Glover, the name that made Christopher Lloyd both admire and feel uneasy in Back to the Future. One memory still burned in Lloyd's mind: Crispin's heated argument with the producers about the film's ending. Crispin believed the McFly's sudden wealth sent the wrong message, promoting materialism over love and family. He proposed a different, more humane conclusion. The crew was annoyed, dismissing him as overdramatic. Lloyd stayed silent, but inside he wrestled with irritation. Who was he to challenge what we had all agreed upon? Now, at 86, Lloyd admits Crispin was among the colleagues who unsettled him the most. Yet he also concedes, without Crispin, Back to the Future might have lost a layer of uniqueness. "I hated the instability he brought," Lloyd said, "but I have to admit without it, we might have lost part of the soul." Perhaps that is the paradox of all artistic relationships. Sometimes, the ones who wear us down are the very ones who make the work immortal. To Lloyd, Crispin was more than a difficult colleague. He was a mirror, reflecting Lloyd's own limits, the boundaries of safety, the need for control. By naming Crispin in his final list, Lloyd wasn't condemning him, but confessing. He had been afraid, unsettled, yet ultimately transformed. And audiences, hearing this, might smile knowingly. Because who hasn't had a Crispin in their life? A friend, a coworker, someone who shakes us to the core, yet leaves an indelible mark we can never forget. If Michael J. Fox was the embodiment of youthful brilliance, then Crispin Glover was more like a headwind eccentric, unpredictable, and at times unsettling. To audiences, Crispin was George McFly, the timid, awkward father who ultimately overcomes fear to become a family hero. But to those who worked alongside him, Crispin was never just a supporting actor. He carried with him a distinct energy, one that was both creative and disquieting. Christopher Lloyd once summed him up with a short phrase: "A storm in silence." He wasn't loud like Michael, nor dazzling like Lee Thompson. Instead, Crispin would often sit quietly, observing, as if analyzing every breath and movement around him. But once the cameras rolled, that silence would explode. He transformed into someone entirely different, sudden, intense, sometimes breaking free of every boundary the script had laid down. That was the strange magnetism of Crispin on screen. Audiences loved George McFly not just for his story arc, but for that unrepeatable essence Crispin infused into the role. The awkward smile, the downcast eyes, the trembling whenever he faced Biff, all felt so real that many believed it wasn't acting at all, but instinct. Yet that very rawness often made Lloyd, who valued precision and order, deeply uncomfortable. On set, Crispin frequently disrupted the plan. There were days when, instead of delivering his lines as written, he would improvise bizarre dialogue that threw his scene partners off. Lloyd vividly recalled one moment. In a scene where George and Doc cross paths, Crispin suddenly locked eyes with him, cold and unblinking, and added a line that wasn't in the script. The crew laughed, praising his creativity, but Lloyd just stood frozen, heart pounding. He felt pulled into a world Crispin had conjured, a world of chaos, beyond control. "He made me both admire him and fear him," Lloyd confessed. "Every time I stood next to Crispin, I never knew what was going to happen, and that uncertainty made me uneasy." It wasn't only the unpredictability that bothered Lloyd, it was Crispin's constant questioning. During script meetings, when most nodded in agreement with the director, Crispin was often the lone dissenter. He asked, why? He dissected details. He argued relentlessly. To Lloyd, it felt like endless obstinacy, a challenge to group harmony. To Crispin, it was his way of defending art. Older audiences, listening to Lloyd's recollections, might recognize this type of person, someone who refuses to fit in, who exhausts everyone, yet brings a vitality no one else can. Crispin was exactly that for Back to the Future. Michael J. Fox, the name that made Christopher Lloyd the most uneasy in Back to the Future. Now, at 86, Lloyd has chosen to name Michael among the colleagues who unsettled him most. Not to wound, not to stir up old drama, but to be honest about his own feelings. Because sometimes, discomfort itself is a form of acknowledgement you only feel overshadowed when the other person truly shines. And in Lloyd's eyes, Michael J. Fox was that brilliant star, one he admired and wrestled with for decades. At the end of the road, Lloyd doesn't deny Michael's talent, nor the friendship they shared. He simply wants audiences to know that behind Doc Brown's grin and bursts of laughter, there was once a quiet heart carrying the weight of being eclipsed. By naming Michael, Lloyd isn't erasing their legacy. He's confessing that even in the brightest partnerships, there are private truths only old age can finally set free. To the public, Michael J. Fox was the young hero of an era, a boyish smile, bright eyes, and an energy that seemed inexhaustible. From the very first moment Marty McFly appeared, millions of viewers were captivated. At just 20, Michael brought to Back to the Future a vitality few could ever replace. He embodied youth, charming rebellion, and the belief that if you dared to dream, you could bend time itself. For many, Michael was the soul of the film. The way he hopped on a skateboard, clutched his guitar, or scrambled through impossible situations turned Marty McFly into an icon. The public adored him. The press called him a screen prodigy. Producers saw him as box office gold. That spotlight burned so brightly it overshadowed others, even seasoned actors, who had long since made their names. Christopher Lloyd, playing the eccentric Doc Brown, was one of them. In Lloyd's memory, Michael was always polite and friendly. He never once thought of him as arrogant or rude. What unsettled him was something else, the sheer effortlessness. Michael seemed born a star. Complex scenes, long stretches of dialogue, he handled them with ease. Lloyd, trained in the discipline of theater, used to digging deep into layers of character psychology, sometimes felt deflated by Michael's quickness and natural ease. He made it look effortless, while I had to sweat just to keep up, Lloyd once confided to a friend. The difference wasn't Michael's fault. But for a veteran actor, it was a quiet wound. On set, cheers often followed Fox. Whenever he walked in, the atmosphere lit up. Director Robert Zemeckis showered him with praise. Colleagues were drawn to his charm, and Lloyd? He quietly carried out his role. His talent was recognized, yes, but the attention always circled back to the young star. One moment etched in Lloyd's memory was the scene where Marty steps out of the DeLorean after returning from the future. The crew erupted in applause, some even chanting Michael's name. Lloyd smiled, composed on the outside. But inside he sighed. He knew he was integral to the story, yet he felt like the rhythm keeper in a band unnoticed until missing. For Lloyd, that unease never turned into anger. He wasn't jealous, nor did he ever try to diminish Michael. He respected him deeply, even loved him like a younger brother. But at the same time, he carried the ache of being overshadowed. It was like standing beside a giant spotlight you couldn't help but become the shadow, even if no one meant it that way. Years later, when Michael bravely revealed his battle with Parkinson's, Lloyd was among the first to show support. He admired the same indomitable spirit that had once lit up the screen. Yet, in private, Lloyd sometimes admitted, "Michael made me feel both fondness and smallness. I hated that feeling. It wasn't hostility, it was a subtle discomfort, the kind that makes you both draw close and step back to protect your pride." Lee Thompson, the name that left Christopher Lloyd both fond and conflicted in Back to the Future. Leah Thompson became that mirror in Lloyd's life. At 86, when he recalled her name among the colleagues who made him uneasy, he stressed, "I never hated her as a person. I only hated the feeling her sweetness left in me. A feeling of being cherished, yet quietly stripped of equality." What moves audiences most is that Lloyd never speaks of Leah with bitterness, but with gentle regret. He doesn't want anyone to think she was false or unworthy. On the contrary, he calls her one of the kindest, most genuine colleagues he ever had. But sometimes, even kindness leaves scars invisible to the world, but unforgettable to the one who bears them. Perhaps that's why, when Lloyd speaks of Leah, you don't hear anger, you hear a tender sorrow. The sorrow of a man who once lived in the spotlight, now looking back and realizing some of the deepest wounds don't come from betrayal, but from love that was simply too much. In the memories of millions, Leah Thompson will forever be Lorraine Baines McFly, the youthful, gentle, yet strong-willed mother of the Back to the Future trilogy. With her warm smile and eyes that radiated sweetness, Leah became the image of the classic American woman. Traditional, yet free-spirited, tender yet familiar, like someone from your own family. For Christopher Lloyd, his first impression of Leah wasn't her beauty or her acting talent, but her thoughtfulness. On set, she had a way of caring for everyone from the crew to the cast. She would often ask Lloyd about his health, listening patiently to his old theater stories that few others had the time or interest for. She had something that made you feel safe, like you were truly being heard, Lloyd once said. And yet, that very gentleness sometimes pricked at him. The friendlier Leah was, the more Lloyd felt a subtle distance between them. With Michael J. Fox, he felt overshadowed. With Crispin Glover, he felt unsettled. But with Leah, the discomfort took another shape, the sense of being cared for like an aging father, rather than regarded as an equal colleague. Once, during a break between takes, Lloyd admitted his nerves about playing such a wild character as Doc Brown. Leah gently placed her hand on his shoulder and smiled. "You're doing great, Chris. You are the soul of that character." It was kind, warm, reassuring, but to Lloyd, it was also like a tiny needle piercing his pride. He was a seasoned actor, a Broadway veteran, who had embodied dozens of complex roles. He didn't need to be comforted like a novice. At times, Lloyd even felt that Leah unintentionally reinforced the image of him as the kind old uncle of the cast. Whenever tensions flared, Leah would step in to mediate, drawing people back together with her charm and grace. Everyone praised her diplomacy. But for Lloyd, it was another reminder of his age, as if he needed a daughter figure to balance the room, rather than being capable of commanding it himself. One memory stayed with him. His birthday on set. The crew brought out a cake, everyone sang. Leah leaned in, kissed him lightly on the cheek, and said, "Happy birthday to our doctor. May you always keep that crazy energy alive." The cast roared with laughter. Lloyd laughed too, but inside, he sank. Why was he our doctor, not our great colleague? He felt cast aside as someone beloved, yes, but not taken entirely seriously. And Leah, with her sweetness, unwittingly reinforced that image. Ironically, Lloyd never resented Leah. He knew her kindness was genuine. She never tried to belittle him. On the contrary, she respected and admired him. But sometimes that admiration built an invisible wall, boxing him into the role of the dignified elder rather than a still-burning artist. Older audiences will understand this feeling well. When younger colleagues, friends, or even family treat you with respect, yet that respect carries an unspoken barrier. You are loved, but not seen as an equal. You are heard, but no longer argued with. Claudia Wells, the name that left Christopher Lloyd restless for what was never completed. At 86, when asked about colleagues who made him uneasy, Lloyd didn't hesitate to name Claudia Wells. Not because she hurt him, but because her departure left him with something incomplete. It was the kind of discomfort you feel when a song ends mid-melody, or when a story stops before the final chapter. To Lloyd, Claudia Wells was never a source of conflict, nor an overwhelming presence. She was simply something beautiful yet brief. And sometimes, it is those brief, unfinished things that leave us with the deepest, most enduring ache. In the vivid canvas of Back to the Future, Claudia Wells appeared as a small but graceful brushstroke. She was Jennifer Parker, the gentle, optimistic girlfriend who stood by Marty McFly. To audiences, Jennifer was never the center of the story, but her presence made Marty's world whole. And to Christopher Lloyd, Claudia embodied something fragile, a beautiful beginning that never had the chance to continue. Lloyd once said that whenever he thought of Claudia, he didn't immediately recall the scenes they filmed together. He remembered the purity in her eyes. Claudia wasn't like Michael, who shone so brightly, nor like Crispin, intense and eccentric. She carried herself lightly, humbly, like a passing breeze. On set, Claudia rarely spoke much. She listened attentively, treated everyone with courtesy, and always kept a respectful distance. Yet that very quietness made Lloyd notice her. "There was something about Claudia that always left me with a sense of regret," he admitted. "She could have become a major star, but she chose a different path. That absence left me with a sadness I couldn't quite shake." The truth is, Claudia only appeared in the first film. By the time the sequel was underway, she stepped away from Hollywood to care for her ailing mother. The role of Jennifer was recast. To Lloyd, it was a loss hard to explain. He wasn't as close to Claudia as he was to Michael, nor did he spar with her as he did with Crispin. But her sudden absence made him feel the fragility of acting itself a profession that could raise you up one day, then take it all away with a single decision. Once, during a cast dinner, Claudia sat next to Lloyd. They spoke of simple dreams. She longed for a quiet life, a warm family, without the chaos of fame. Lloyd, by then hardened by the harshness of the industry, only nodded silently. Years later, when he heard Claudia had left acting, he remembered that moment. She had always known what she wanted. It was everyone else who hadn't realized it yet. That's why, whenever he thought of Claudia, Lloyd felt a unique kind of discomfort. The discomfort of something unfinished. He never blamed her, never resented her. What he hated was the feeling of an important piece suddenly missing from the picture. On screen, Jennifer Parker was once a symbol of hope, a promise of a happy future. But off-screen, Claudia's departure left a gap no one else could fill. Older audiences will surely understand this. Everyone has had a fleeting relationship that lingers for years. A friend, a colleague, someone who passed briefly through your life, yet still stirs something each time you remember. Claudia was that fleeting presence in Christopher Lloyd's memory. One moment he kept close to his heart was Claudia's last day of filming. When the scene wrapped, she smiled, said goodbye quietly, no tears, no drama, just a simple farewell. But Lloyd never forgot that moment. It was like a door closing softly, without a sound, yet leaving behind a silence that stretched on. That silence stayed with him for years. Frances Lee McCain. The strict mother, Christopher Lloyd, both admired and felt uneasy around. And yet, alongside that discomfort, Lloyd held Frances in special esteem. He knew that without people like her, the set could have been far more chaotic. Frances provided balance, never loud, never showy, but always a steady presence. Younger cast members, including Leah Thompson, often said Frances felt like a backstage mom, asking after everyone, paying attention to the smallest details so no one felt left out. At 86, when Lloyd listed the colleagues he hated most from Back to the Future, Frances's name was among them, but his tone carried no bitterness. Instead, his words revealed gratitude. Because sometimes, the people who irritate us most are the ones who leave us with the deepest lessons. Frances Lee McCain, the mother on screen and off, etched herself into Christopher Lloyd's memory, not with quarrels, nor with glory, but with strictness laced with care. And it was that very strictness, though uncomfortable, that became an essential part of the journey Back to the Future for everyone involved. In Back to the Future, Frances Lee McCain played Stella Baines, Lorraine's mother, and thus Marty McFly's grandmother. The role was small, her screen time limited, yet her presence was unforgettable for its sternness and sense of order. Interestingly, behind the scenes, Frances gave Christopher Lloyd that very same impression. Part devoted mother, part strict teacher, someone who never let him feel entirely at ease. At the time, Lloyd was already in his 40s, a seasoned actor. Yet standing next to Frances, he often felt like a schoolboy. Though only a few years older, Frances carried herself with a maturity, calmness, and quiet authority that made him self-conscious. She rarely laughed out loud, rarely cracked jokes. On set, she often kept a serious face, her eyes quietly observing everything, as if always checking whether her colleagues were doing things properly. Lloyd once recalled moments when, fully immersed in Doc Brown's eccentric chaos, Frances would walk over, adjust his collar, or remark, "Stand a little this way, the light will hit you better." These gestures came from care, from her wealth of experience, but to Lloyd, they felt uncomfortable. He hated feeling treated like a clumsy schoolboy, especially in front of younger cast members. Still, Lloyd never denied Frances's talent. She infused Stella Baines with the exact brand of strict 1,950 seconds American motherhood, traditional, orderly, rigid at times. What struck Lloyd was how effortless it was. Frances didn't need to push, just one look from her could shift the atmosphere into seriousness. That was exactly why Lloyd both admired her and felt constrained by her presence. In one interview, Lloyd admitted, "Frances made me feel like I had to be on my best behavior, never sloppy. It was like acting under the gaze of a stern teacher. I hated that feeling, but I also needed it." His hatred wasn't rooted in personal conflict. It came from their opposing temperaments. Lloyd was spontaneous, instinct-driven, thriving on bursts of wild creativity. His Doc Brown was built from that chaos, unpredictable gestures, exaggerated expressions, often beyond the script. Frances, by contrast, embodied order, discipline, and doing it right. Two artists with such different philosophies inevitably created an undercurrent of tension. During one 1,950 seconds family scene, Lloyd overplayed, gesturing wildly, eyes bulging more than necessary. The crew laughed, but Frances did not. She simply looked at him and said calmly but firmly, "Chris, sometimes less is more." The remark struck him deeply. He knew she wasn't mocking, only guiding. Yet inside, his pride stung. Later, reflecting, Lloyd admitted he hated Frances for that very reason. She always forced him to check himself, to rein in his impulses. She was like a mirror reflecting his recklessness, making him face flaws he preferred to ignore. For an artist who thrived on freedom, that was deeply uncomfortable. Thank you for staying with us to hear Christopher Lloyd's late-in-life reflections at the age of 86. This isn't about reopening the past, but about cherishing the journey of a legend, one who, through Back to the Future, gave generations so many unforgettable memories. If this story touched you, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support is the greatest gift, helping these beautiful memories live on.